Class will begin in 0 seconds. Just letting y'all know. Give it just a second more. Okay. I want to talk about this morning the idea of interpretation and misinterpretation a little bit when we start this class. I think that exploration needs to be something that is born out of the heart. I actually wrote the words dance of the heart, but just something that's born, out of the heart. Seeking truth is using a keen mind to figure things out. And without it, the heart can be abducted and it can be filled with chaos and confusion. And a lot of hearts get filled that way. We need to discern between interpretation and misinterpretation. That means sometimes that we have to sift through the clues and use critical thinking as our guiding light to help us get through things. As we strive to unravel mysteries for those who are lost, let's do it with care. And let our intellect boldly confront things that are the realm of interpretation. This is a hard class. It really is. And I think it's one of those things that you have to be exposed to multiple times. And don't feel bad if you're reading the book ahead of time. That's okay. There's terms that are said in this class, and I like Brian's comment. He had to go back and look at something. He's like, I don't know how to explain it, but there it is. It's and you see some of these things in science, and you're going, unless you studied that, you may not grasp the whole concept. But the more you look at this, and the more you develop an understanding, you start to kind of see some of the things that appear to be difficult. Let me tell you something about science. Science uses a bunch of big words. Jeff and I worked in a company that had acronyms. There's a reason why they have the scientific words and the acronyms. Because if you had to say the concept that's involved in that word every time you got ready to mention it, it would be a 20-minute conversation. So everybody understands the conversation. So when a word is thrown out there, people who study this are going, oh yeah, I know what he meant. That's a problem with this kind of study. And sometimes you're going to bump into these words and these phrases and this type of terminology. And when you bump into that, don't feel bad about it. There's a whole concept that goes behind it. Let us not forget the essence of care and compassion that we're really going after here in this. Teaching someone who is steeped in this is sometimes hard. But just remember this. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. 1 Peter 3, verse 15. Let's say a prayer before we get started. Dear Father in heaven, we're so thankful to you that you love us so much, that it's not just a matter of love, but that you are our friend, that you care for us. And we're thankful, Father, that we have life in you. We're thankful that you are the creator of all things, that you made life, and you made it good and called it good. And we're thankful for that, Father. We pray that we'll have a gentle spirit when we talk to others about you and about this subject. We pray that you'll help us weed through a lot of the things that have deceived the world. We are amazed at how Satan can take something so beautiful and twist it. And we pray, Father, that you'll help us with compassion and love be able to expose that to some people and lead them to Christ. Help us with our hearts, Father, as we study this morning. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So there was a story in the book that I said it was okay to read. It's about Johnny. I don't know how many of you got a chance to read, but Johnny, I'll summarize it. He was a 16-year-old, and he finds a message spilled out on the placemat. It looks like somebody had knocked over some alphabet cereal, and it spread out, and it spelled out the words that take out the trash, Mom. And Johnny sees this message here, and he brushes it off as coincidence. It just was chance that it happened to spell out those words. He's 16, and he's got other ideas. He doesn't really want to pay attention to that message. So he brushes it off, thinking that it was caused by natural events. So he heads to the beach because he's hoping to see Mary before Scott sees her, because he's got a crush on her. And instead, he finds them together, and they're holding hands, and he sees this love note message that's there, and he just kind of dismisses that message. Well, perhaps the wind, blew around and something happened, and this message just formed in the sand with his heart. Natural causes, chance, that's what caused this. And in the clouds later on, he looks up and he sees the word drink Coke in the sky and a cloud formation. And he believes, in this case, that intelligence was behind it. Even though he doesn't see the airplane, he believes that a plane was doing some skywriting and wrote this message. The experience makes him realize that sometimes we accept or reject conclusions based on what we believe. So the question that was in the handout was, this question is about interpretation and misinterpretation. How can we tell if we're understanding something correctly, especially when our own opinions, outside influences, and not having all the facts might make it harder to know what's true and what's just a guess? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Mary's got a question. Got an answer? And maybe a question. What does that even mean?
I think the answer is humility.
Humility.
And don't be afraid to have your assumptions challenged. Try to be open-minded, but not too open-minded. But listen and try to get what someone's saying.
Okay. So listen. Don't be afraid to be challenged and consider other possibilities.
Right, because I know in my life of 60 plus years that everything I believed when I was younger, I don't believe now, and vice versa. So my opinions and things have changed, and I know that I am influenced by what's around me. I try to be humble about that.
Yeah. We all are. How many in this room have been influenced by the fact that you worship God on a regular basis? We've been influenced by this, right? These things influence us. That's a really good answer, Mary. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to? Jason?
There was somebody before me, according to Emery.
Oh, Joe, I didn't see the mic.
Sorry, Tim.
Joe, we don't really want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Jason? No, I'm teasing. Joe, go ahead. Joe, go ahead.
That's okay. It makes me feel at home sometimes. So I think another thing, and I think Mary alluded to this, is preconceived ideas. We already have the answer to the question before we ask the question.
Yeah.
And that's a human kind of thing, because we've got our own thought process and stuff like that. So I think, just to step beyond yourself and just use your ears or whatever the situation is to really look at the evidence. You know what I'm saying? And not say, well, I know that 2 + 2 is whatever. Step beyond that and just look at it. Because I think even in this situation, what if when the alphabet, spilled out and it said, you should really go to the beach. Well, no, I don't think I need to do that, because that's, in other words, he just wanted to read what he wanted to read.
He wanted to see what he wanted to see. Yeah.
What I'm saying?
What did he want to see, Joe, when he read that?
What now?
What didn't he want to see when he read that?
That he had to, clean up or whatever, do the chores and stuff. He didn't want to see that. So that's what I'm saying. Just move past what you want, your preconceived ideas, and that helps.
All right, that's good. Jason?
Kind of along the lines of what we've already said is, we cannot have a knee-jerk reaction if we're going to have a discussion with somebody. And we have a knee-jerk reaction because we've decided we have all the answers, and sometimes we do have the answer. But we still have to give proper and due consideration to what somebody else is saying if we want them to give the same consideration to the things we are saying. And so we can't, when somebody asserts something that we know is patently false, we don't just beat them up with it. kind of extend them. How did you come to that conclusion? And then you can start a conversation and then maybe make a point back to the other. The other thing is, we need to be open-minded. And I am not using the world's definition of open-minded. My definition of open-minded is being willing to listen to new information, digest it, and come to a conclusion. Now, that new information may not change my opinion or my belief or anything, but I have given it its due consideration. And I think that's the difference. Okay. But if we want people to give consideration to us teaching them about the gospel, teaching them even things from this class where it's not about the Bible specifically, but about a common sense understanding of why we believe in God, then we need to also give them that same due consideration.
Okay. I think that we do need to consider what's being said. We can't just do the cavalier dismissal of everything. Thanks, Jason. Chris, you had something?
Yeah, I'm hoping this. I'm not sure this is where this question intended to go, but like let's say, for example, you have a person who is dealing with a difficult conundrum in their life and they're praying about it, and then they see that plane writing in the sky and it says go this way, and then they go this way, and then they see a sign that someone painted that says goes that way. And let's say that happens 3 or 4 more times, and they get to the end, and there's the answer to all life's impending questions. A bystander would say, well, someone put that in the sky, and someone painted that, and someone did this and that and that, and they can always attribute it to man's creation. But at the end of the day, to that person, someone led them there. And so that's where I think the faith thing comes in, where you can do this all day, but at the end of the day, it's where's your logical conclusion going to be?
Okay, hang on the mic a second, because we just entered into something, and so I'm going to ask you a different question. Yeah. In this case, with the skywriting, he saw that. Did he misinterpret that? Do you think he misinterpreted the skywriting, drink Coke?
Well, I think sometimes it's both. A man did put that writing in the sky.
Okay.
But God knew it was going to happen.
Okay. How many of y'all think, just raise show of hands, how many think he misinterpreted the skywriting message from the airplane? Okay. Herb's saying you don't have enough information. How many of y'all agree with that? That's kind of in there. So you do a half raise, Herb, because you're kind of, So this is important. This is an important one of those things that you need to understand. What should he have done in the instance of the cereal? He should have considered something other than just his bias, right? And it's not. Should he do that in the skywriting too? Because when you start engaging in this conversation with an atheist, you're going to need to do that. You can't just say it's obvious, because my daddy's told me that my whole life. It's simple for me. I know that writing didn't have the sky. So in context of this class, I think, Chris, that you bring up an interesting point. In context of this class, that we need to look at it and everything. We don't want to misinterpret, especially when you're dealing with somebody. You're not on the same page. You're not going to go, well, God made it this way. They're going to go, I don't believe in God. And you're having these very difficult conversations. In this particular context, interpretation and misinterpretation is important. Let me just go to the next one. It requires critical thinking, consideration of context, the examination of the evidence. It involves questioning assumptions, acknowledging biases, which was one that I think Mary brought up, and being open to alternative explanations. Now, I don't like to be open to all alternative explanations when I know I'm right. And we got to be careful of that, right? We need to hear them and listen. And when you're doing this, you're not really supposed to be sitting there thinking, I'm waiting for my opportunity to jump in and checkmate. Instead, you want to listen. You want to hear, because there's information in there. You're going to want to understand where they're coming from. All right, so what's up there, that didn't happen with Johnny. What happened was selective skepticism. All right, he was a skeptic selectively, and that kind of thing happens all the time. It's do we ever do this? Never do this. It refers to the systematic pattern of deviating from rationality or logic in judgment. This is where individuals create their own subjective reality based on their perception of information received and what they want. There's a lot of things that drive it. But that's what selective skepticism is, and that's really what Johnny's doing here. He's picking and choosing, and we don't want to do that when we're having these discussions. All right, critical thinking. So critical thinking is absent here as well. In the decision-making process, Johnny does not objectively evaluate the evidence presented to him. He selectively accepts or rejects messages based on his personal biases and desires. So Johnny does not consider any alternative explanations. These are things that we need to consider. How does Tim's personal biases influence, interpret, or misinterpret messages? What role does critical thinking have in Tim's decision-making process? How does he look at messages that are going out there and the validity of those messages? What biases are evident in Tim's heart, and how do they affect his decision-making? So I want to encourage you that when you're striving to interpret and not misinterpret, it's good to know that there's some laws out there. There's some laws out there that can help us. One set of such laws are called natural laws, also referred to as non-intelligent laws. Now, this is one of those things I was telling you about. Non-intelligent laws, when you first hear that, that sounds like we're not supposed to have any intelligence in our laws. But this means something different. Natural laws and non-intelligent laws in the scientific community mean the same thing. Brian used the example in his class where he said that it's frustrating when they just want to attribute everything to Mother Nature, and that's kind of difficult too, because if it's non-intelligent laws, there is no mother with intelligence, and natural law is just that. I guess the way to put this is scientist. Let's get this straight. Scientist. Not science. Scientists, the people, recognize three types of laws as the principles or rules that govern the natural world. Some scientists, not science, describes this natural world as operating without the influence of conscious intelligence. Non-intelligent laws. You understand that they think it operates that way, without the intervention or direction of an intelligent agent. Therefore, the phrase non-intelligent laws is just another way to say natural laws. So a side note, if you look at the play on words, whenever Ben Stein produced Expelled, there's a play on words there. You can see it. No intelligence allowed. Now, he's making a play on words, but this is a thing, all right? No intelligence is a thing. It's the idea of natural law. That is, if you have not ever seen this documentary, you really should watch it. It's good. It's really good. The basic scientific belief is that phenomenon is governed by these laws. So forces within the natural world occur as a result of inherent properties or forces. And rather than through deliberate action or design by an intelligent. Now, in certain situations, you're going to go, but why? And they're going to say, because science said so. And I think it's better to say scientists say so, because this is a trap later on. But scientists said so, not necessarily science. So here's an example that I think we can relate to of an example of this. All right, the law of gravity. It's considered to be one of these natural laws. So if I was asked the question, if I believe 100% that all objects are subject to gravity, what would I say? I would say no. All right, now, and Herb's thinking he's lost his mind. Okay, this goes back to something that Brian brought up about I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Okay, here's the problem with the question. I have not observed all objects. Now, that being said, I can attest to the fact that all objects I have observed are subject to gravity, so I believe with 99% certainty that I'm going to continue to see this type of thing. Do you see that? It's just, when you're having these conversations, you have to take a step back for a second and pay attention to the question. Are you 100% sure that I haven't seen all objects. I can't answer that. I can only attest to what I have seen. Is it reasonable for me to believe in gravity? Is it reasonable? Right. Tom, you have a question?
Just a comment, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
In court cases, most of them are built on circumstantial evidence. We like to say that they're not, that we have total fact, that the result is beyond question, but most cases are built on circumstantial evidence. It may be in the future that a new piece of evidence shows up that recasts that into a different light.
Okay.
However, if we never made a decision in court, aside from pure 100% fact, no decision would ever be reached. To your point about gravity, we've not observed everything, but the circumstantial evidence is that everything responds to gravity.
So I have enough faith to believe in gravity. You know, I have enough faith to believe in God, too. But it gets a little more difficult. Jason?
Well, I'm not picking on Tom because it's a great point. But I just want to explain what circumstantial evidence is. You know what circumstantial evidence is? Fingerprints. Circumstantial evidence is DNA. So circumstantial evidence is not weak evidence.
Okay. So we're going to get into that. So let's hold that, because I'm going to bring up forensics in this.
Well, no worries. I just want to emphasize that circumstantial evidence is by no means weak evidence. It's strong.
It's strong evidence, but we in court. I take your case here. You know, beyond a reasonable doubt. Most things that happen in court too carry the other idea of we're not really studying this, but it's the legal and historical evidence. You know, prove Abraham Lincoln. You know, you're going to go to the historical and the legal evidence. Prove Jesus. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to go to the legal and the historical evidence. All right, so does that kind of make sense? There's another one. This is non-intelligent laws of ink and paper. Okay, so the non-intelligent laws of ink and paper kind of break down like this. The law of ink and paper refers to physical properties and processes involved in the creation and the interaction of ink and paper, which are not governed, this is going to be hard to hear, it's not governed by intelligence or conscious decision making. I know that's hard to hear, but you have to break it down like this. What this science is about viscosity, adhesion, absorption, color, capillary action, surface tension, drying process, temperature, and humidity. These are things that are just natural laws of what's going to happen when you do this. And what we're doing is we're taking those natural laws and we're massaging them and manipulating them with intelligence to get an inkjet printer to print this ink out on a piece of paper that'll absorb it just at the right amount without smudging and smearing. But there's actually, a lot of chemistry that's natural and a lot of these other things going on behind the scenes. Now, I want to show you something. Now Brian knows why I was looking for my Bible frantically. I have my Bible in front of me. And if you look at this, it's filled with paper. And this paper has been printed with ink on it. Can you imagine that you tell your friends, I'm going to a Bible study. You want to come? And so they come along to see the Bible study, and we all sit down and we go, look at it. You can almost see how it's slightly raised on the paper. What do you think the adhesion was like on this? And that was all of our Bible studies. All of our Bible studies would be a study of natural laws concerning how that ink got put on that paper. Is that a Bible study that's going to last long? We have a very different idea of Bible study. What are we interested in a Bible study? What is it that we're interested in? Are we interested in this paper and this ink? What is it? Somebody shout it out. Herbie, you know what it is.
What he says, what God says.
It's the message that's in here, what God has said. There's a message that's being communicated on this paper and this ink, and all those things are still true. But there's something deeper. There's a message here. Now, I wanted to, I'm on one slide off. So that's the Bible. That's how we look at the Bible. I didn't know I was going to find my Bible. I stuck that graphic line there at the last minute this morning because I'm like, I can't find my Bible. I guess I could have used a Pew Bible. There's another book. This is Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. Now, yesterday, I wanted to go buy this book to have as a prop in class, and Ann says to me, I don't want that book in our house. Because we know how chapter 2 starts out. We've heard it read before. And she's right. So it's like, yeah, we're not going to buy the book. She says, can't you just put a picture of it up there? So yeah, Richard Dawkins wrote The God Delusion. Now, these two books are in competition against each other, but they both have ink on paper. But the messages are quite a bit different. All right, now, it's important that we understand messages because Darwinists assert that life was generated spontaneously from non-living chemicals by natural laws without any intelligent intervention. They say that life was simple, and the one-celled animal known as the amoeba points out something a little different, that there is no such thing as simple life. The supreme problem that the Darwinists are facing is explained, in their difficulty to explain, the origin of first life. Origin of first life is a problem. Now, I want you to notice the title of the book. We don't often bring this up. But the origin of the species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. That's the book that Darwin wrote. All right? And make no mistake about it. Now, in all fairness to Darwin and the cell, in Darwin's day, you know what the cell did? You know what the science was behind the cell? And the cell split. And science applauded, the cell split. And it was just that simple of an explanation. The difference between, and this comes up in the movie Expelled too, the difference of what we know today about cells versus what Darwin knew is almost like nothing to a million times more. The information we know about the cell is quite a bit different. I sometimes wonder if he would have written such a book, if he would have seen what we know today and what's happened. He's a fair scientist, but I want you to also catch what he's saying there. And I think this comes up in the movie Expelled as well. Favored races in the struggle for life. I'll let you watch the movie. Darwin has struggled, though, to explain the origin of first life. You know why they can't do that. You weren't there. And they have a hard time. They can't go back. But it's not simple. And thanks to James Watson and Francis Crick, something happened that changed everything. And it's deoxyribonucleic, I'm going to get this wrong, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. DNA. That's a mouthful. That's one of those scientific words that will trouble you. Okay. Basically what they found is a language, and a rather complex language. Are we going to look at this and say natural law, or are we going to say divine law? Now, if you look at these two pictures for just a second, one is seen through a telescope, and the other one is a simulation of it's a nice graphic. It doesn't look like that, by the way, but one is seen through the microscope. What's fascinating to me is that tell me that God doesn't have an amazing sense of humor. Where are we in the middle of this? It all looks so big when you're looking out there into space. And when you look at it smaller and smaller and go into the subatomic level, it looks like it's big in the other direction from where you are. It's huge. And here we sit in the middle of all of this going, what is this DNA thing? And what is this message? Well, let me see if I can go back. These two men, they came up with a way of looking at DNA. And it's a quaternary numeric data system. Now, you've heard of binary systems like computers use. This is 4, and it's 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. And these letters comprise what is known as the 4-letter genetic alphabet. And it is complex. Okay? We're talking about complexity. Richard Dawkins is a Darwinist and the professor of zoology at Oxford University. And even he admits that DNA is huge. It's so big that when talking about the amoeba, the tiny amoeba, he has to admit that the data that's inside just the nucleus is the equivalent of 30 volumes, or rather the equivalent of the 33-volume Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know why I'm losing my speech pattern here, but I am. If you take all that data and you combine it, that's the size of what's in the nucleus. Now, when you consider the whole amoeba, it's 1,000 times that. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of information. And if you consider that for just a second, that's 34,000 copies of the English Standard Version of the Bible. That's how much data is in that thing. Now, this is an amazing idea, the fact that some people call it a blueprint, but there's flaws with a blueprint because it's dynamic. Blueprints are kind of rigid. DNA is not as rigid as a blueprint. But it is interesting that in the cells in your body, that the information to construct every other cell in your body is in that cell. Now, if it's making a cell over here on my cheek, it's ignoring the stuff that makes my eye when it does it. But I worry about science sometimes when we say things like, and it's read into a factory, and it creates a cell. It reads all that data, and it creates a cell. That's fascinating. And so all of our genetic engineers are out there creating vaccines and everything else, and I worry that kind of thing could just lead to something where we all have a cold forever and never can really quite get over that cold as they start to do these things and manipulate. But that word factory, excuse me, and then they say it's machinery inside. That gives me a pause, because have you been inside that factory? Have you seen these machines? See, we're still just scratching. God is laughing at us. We think that we've gone deep. I'm telling you, we haven't gone as deep as God has gone. God understands this in a different way. He made it. Now, there's a science that has come out of DNA that's rather interesting. Anne likes to watch, the cold case type of files of crime. And what's really cool about this is that there were guys that were committing crimes back in the 80s and 70s, early 70s, 80s, and the databases for DNA weren't that big, and they hadn't really finished all their work on DNA. And as these databases have now grown, well, they're opening up these cold cases. They said, we did collect the DNA, and here's how good it is. It's so good that if they don't have a match, they go, well, let's see if Ancestor.com has it and get some familia DNA. It would be a third cousin, and they're finding these people. And then when they can't do that, they're saying, can we send this into a computer and have it draw a picture of what the person looks like? Now, that's a lot of message right there and a lot of data. And there's a lot of intelligence in that. What we're being told, though, is that in the study of the origin of life, no, you can't allow that. No intelligence allowed here. It's kind of like having handcuffs on having this conversation at times. It's like, okay, you're going to have to try something. And why not? Well, because that science doesn't say so. No, that scientist doesn't say so. What's happening is people who are in the field of microbiology who study genetics, they're starting to slowly and surely change their mind. So here's a question. When you look at, and that is the volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica, when you look at that and you go back to the original question, take out the garbage mom. Mary loves Scott. Drink Coke. Now, if those things required an intelligent being to form those messages, then why doesn't data like that times 1,000 require one? And that's the question. This is what the scientific community is being asked. You're going to have to be honest here. You're going to have to let go of some of these biases. It's really a convenient science if you think about it. They've had 16 decades on this. You know how much money has been spent in evolutionary sciences and the grants that have been given? And here's the beauty of it. Since you can't go back and observe it because it happened before any of this was around or before we were born, you can keep this science going forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, because we're just not going to allow that in there. Now, again, in the movie, the documentary, something comes up where he's interviewing Dawkins, and he asks him, he goes, do you believe in God? And he gets a little offended. He goes, no, I told you I don't believe in God. He goes, Allah, any other gods? He's like, Buddha. He's like, no, why would I? That's just ridiculous. And he says, he brings up intelligent design, and he goes, well, perhaps aliens. And I remember in the documentary, because Ben Stein does this camera take, you're like, you heard him say it. I can't believe in God, but I can accept that maybe an alien race did some sort of, terraforming here and built a planet. Now, that particular science is becoming more popular. I have a theory that what will happen over time is that's just going to be the new avenue, because now we're going to pursue finding aliens forever and ever and ever. How convenient. If you get a chance, you should go look at some of the DNA stuff that's out there. There's been an enormous amount of money in a very short period of time to develop that science, because it's heavy. One scientist said, who works in genetics, he's a believer, a lot of them are, he says, you can't work with this stuff day in and day out. He says, and not believe in God. He says, you're looking at a message that came from God. And one of the other things about that is as you start to look at this message, he says, scientists love the results I'm getting. They just don't want to know how I'm getting it. You catch that? They don't really want to know how this is working and why I'm getting these answers and why we're able to do all these things. It's because they're getting closer to understanding more and more what they're looking at, what they're reading. I remember when Buddy Payne was here, Jeff Hunt said to me, he goes, it's kind of like object-oriented programming. You probably don't remember saying that, but he said, we were looking at, he did an extensive talk on DNA, and Jeff says it's like object-oriented programming. Very similar. There's a lot of properties like inheritance and things like that are in there. It's somewhere in between blueprints and that, and it's more fluid and more dynamic. All right, so let's go to the intelligent message. I don't know what click I'm on. All right, we're going to talk about the intelligent message. There's a way in science that you can use this to discover things and to figure things out, and it's through a different kind of science, which is forensic science. So the second question, and I knew I had two slides in there that were exactly the same, how might integrating forensic science into the study of evolutionary biology enhance our understanding of the origin of life? Now, I know that you'd have to read the book thing. That's why I put the page numbers, because there's something specific there, I'm sure. Does anybody want to give a stab at that? How could forensic science help us? Joe's got an answer. Anybody besides Joe? No, I'm kidding, Joe. Go ahead.
Here we go
I'm
again.
picking on Joe. He's going to pick on me back later, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll get you sometime. So it discussed the principle of uniformity and how when you look at things today that it should, you would make the same assumption of how it worked in the past, no matter how long ago that was. And so when you start looking at the first origins of life, and you can't reproduce it today under, the way that they've tried to do it is what I understood, then it couldn't have been done then. So if you can't do it now, principle of uniformity says you can't do it then. Well, you couldn't have done it back then, I should say, at the origin of time, at the beginning of time. So if you can't do it now, you can't do it then there had to be somebody somewhere in the neighborhood there, if you will, to start stuff. So that's what I understood from my reading.
I think that's really good. Herb's got a question too. Jeff, did you get a mic?
I did. I was looking for the term in the book that describes what Joe said, and I can't seem to find it right off.
Was it the principle of uniformity?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
The principle of uniformity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I like the example he gives in the book about like how the Grand Canyon was
I'm going to cut
created.
Jeff off right there. Those slides are coming up.
That slide's coming up? Okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
But, you asked the question, well, how did that happen?
Well,
Well, we can do something similar with water and get a similar result. And so that's how I think we can use forensic science, because you can repeat things based on principles. And if you can't repeat them, then I'm not sure what that conclusion is. But
no, it's a good conclusion. It's a good thought. So the principle of uniformity, let me just go forward a couple and then we'll come back. Go one more and one more. All right. So what Jeff's talking about is that this is natural, right? The Grand Canyon, and this is in your book, the picture of it, how did that thing happen? Well, it happened by erosion. Water did that. And why do we know that? Well, not because we were there when the Grand Canyon was formed, but we've seen other erosion take place. We see what it does, and our observation says, no, water caused that. If you've ever been out there, you're going, oh yeah, I know. We're all going, I know what the water was. It's a big erosion that took place there. And so we see that, and that's a really good example of natural. Now, in the book, the other one that they give you is Mount Rushmore. Oh, that was an accident, or was that natural? A lot of dynamite and a very, very good sculptor did this. I'm going to go back, but Herb, you were going to make a comment.
Well, the question was, how would adding forensic science, the study of evolutionary biology? So first we got to define what forensic is. And I believe it's the idea of investigation and testing. Am I close? I don't.
Yeah, and it's real, and it has some strengths like historic. Just think cold case.
What's that?
Cold case. It's like.
By the way, I'm with Ann. I like that series she likes. But so if we're doing investigation with evolutionary biology, then we would honestly discard our biases. We would accept what the truths are, and would help us understand it. And come away from this idea that, well, it must be an alien race or it must be, a Big Bang.
Almost really good answer, Herb. That's a lot of that was what I had written down here. So the proponents of ID are basically saying, I think we should include the science. No, not allowed. No intelligence allowed in this particular avenue of study. And that's really what we're bumping up against. The principle of uniformity allows us to analyze evidence and draw conclusions about past events. Think about that for a second. We're able to look, we can make conclusions based on things that we see. So that's the principle of uniformity. Here's one, Hebrews 13:8-9. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Do not be led away by diverse and strange teachings. Isn't that interesting? For it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by foods which have not benefited those devoted to them. And I'm going to tell you something. This idea of pursuing Darwinism the way it has not been food that has benefited those who have devoted their life works to it. They don't have the answers. 16 decades later, they haven't really moved the dial much. There's been a lot of interesting stuff, but that verse is very appropriate. That's the thing. DNA was around at the beginning, and what we're looking at, when we look at DNA today, we're going, yeah, I can make a pretty fair guess that this is a clue, that this has something to do with all of it. Wink, wink. So this is all pretty simple, actually. So how simple is it? And it is just that simple. The Grand Canyon and intelligent, and that was really what it had. So there's one last thing here. Because science said so, or because scientists said so, which one is it? Because this idea of closing out this is not accepted by all scientists. There are many scientists that believe, oh, no. The more science we have in the mix, the better. Because science said so, though, is the typical answer. Like when you say, well, why wouldn't you want to do this? Because it's, and the answer is because the science says that's not the way it works. Well, you need to redefine the science that you're using then. We learn more. It's kind of goes against what I thought science was all about. One of the most fundamental observations in all science has been that life arises only from similar existing life. Scientists have been unable to combine chemicals in a test tube and arrive at a DNA molecule, much less any form of life. Did the first bell ring? I wasn't paying attention. When does the second one ring? Right now. Give me just a second more. All experiments that were designed to do this have failed. Brian covered some of this, so I just want to say this about chance. It just doesn't sound scientific, and there's a problem with chance. But the idea is that if there's just enough time, and enough time passes, and that there's a chance that something's going to happen. There's a line in a movie called, I'm almost embarrassed to say, I've seen this movie, it's called Dumb and Dumber, where the character wants to know if he can, if there's a possibility of him and this girl ever being together. And he just lays it all out there, and she says, the chances aren't real good. And he goes, you mean like a 1 in 100 chance? And she says, no, it's more like 1 in a million. To which Jim Carrey goes, so you're saying I've got a chance? And that's the way the science has gone. One last thing. But ask the beast, and they will teach you. The birds of the heavens, and they will tell you. Or the bushes of the earth, and they will teach you. And the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind. And thanks for your attention this morning.